Yeah, took a little backhanded shot at Chip when he said it's not about winning the press conference because obviously Chip's very witty. Doug, more straightforward, came across as just, an everyday guy. So he made sure to mention it's not about, making waves at the beginning. It's slow and steady, winning the race. And, yeah, it is, more than one person had pointed out he's the anti-Chip Kelly, and clearly things derailed not only between Howie Roseman and Chip Kelly, but also Jeffrey Lurie and Chip Kelly. And, maybe the biggest news in this whole thing, and it's strange when you announce a new head coach and a new defensive coordinator, they both talked, but Howie Roseman also talked after the press conference, and he kind of, went a little farther than I thought I did, because he admitted he needs to work on building relationships because he's had a lot of issues with a lot of people in that building that go far further than Chip Kelly. It goes back years of people who haven't been able to work with Howie Roseman, and he kind of, to his credit, took that on today and said he needs to work on it and he needs to be able to work with others.
Yeah, it sounds very much like what's going on in the building across the street with Jerry Colangelo and Sam Henke. Like, hey, here's a guy who maybe has some talent, maybe he's a smart guy, maybe, but he does have some warts. It's interesting to hear him, from what I was reading in a lot of the tweets that were out there, John, sounded like a guy who was kind of pouring his heart out, wanted to, rebrand and reimage himself.
Yeah, it really was. It was kind of emotional for him. He seemed really heartfelt when he said it, and he said he just didn't stick his head in the sand over the past year when he was essentially demoted. Although I think most of us would like to be demoted that way. Mike, if you want to demote me and give me a raise, feel free, because that's what happened with Howie Roseman. So it wasn't your typical demotion, but clearly, this guy has always worn the fact that he loves personnel on his sleeve, and that was his love of this job and the joy of it. So even though we joke about him getting a raise and getting a new title and all that stuff, he was hurt by having that taken away. And now that he's got it back, I think he understands he's going to have to need to work with people, because one thing that was clear from this press conference is that there's going to be a lot of questions moving forward about accountability. And Jeffrey Lurie mentioned that word numerous times when talking about Chip Kelly. Now it's got to relate to Howie Roseman, too, because from this point forward, he's got to be accountable for this roster, this team, these draft picks.
Did you leave impressed with Doug Peterson? I know we both have been comfortable with the hire. You heard what he said. I have a poll up on my Twitter page, John, and I asked that question after hearing Peterson. Are you comfortable with what you heard from Doug Peterson? Were you impressed with Doug Peterson? 63% have said yes, they were impressed with Doug Peterson. 37% said no, and a sizable amount of votes, almost 50 votes there. So it seems like Peterson impressed today.
I'm a little surprised by that, to be honest. I was about to answer that to say I'm fine with it. I'm impressed, but I didn't think a lot of people were going to come out of it. In fact, I've heard some quotes that he was nervous and things like that. I didn't necessarily get that. I just think it's a different personality. He's more understated. He's not going to go up there with quips, and he's not going to do a stand-up act like Chip Kelly did at times. So I didn't know how it was going to come across. I thought Jim Schwartz handled himself better. He spoke on the side after Peterson spoke, the new defensive coordinator. But even that didn't really surprise me, because he's been a head coach in this league, and he's used to this kind of stuff more than Doug is. And it's going to be a feeling out process, and I think you saw that today. Some of the questions were a little bit unfair, like the last drive in Kansas City and all that stuff. It's just, it tells you how difficult this media market is.
How did you think he handled that, and were those questions fair for his inaugural day?
Well, I'm not going to say they're unfair, because everything is you're head coach in the National Football League, and your history is open for question. So I'm not going to say it was unfair. It's just a little ridiculous that people have made assumptions that Doug Peterson is horrible at time management over the second half of the game against the New England Patriots in Foxborough. They weren't supposed to win that game. They didn't win. I don't think it's necessarily moving forward. He's going to be terrible at this for the rest of time. And that's the part that I think is a little bit unfair. I would say the best coaches in this league, Bill Belichick, number one. Bruce Arians, to me, is number two. And if you watch the Cardinals-Packers game, he had some of the worst time management decisions you'll ever see that enabled Green Bay.
And keep in mind, John, you mentioned Arians. In 2013, he was not a quote-unquote exciting, hot name. He had just come off a nice run with the Colts as an interim coach, but he was not a guy people were fighting over.
No, the Eagles canceled an interview with him because of Chip Kelly. And that's a thing that'll probably haunt Jeffrey Lurie until he does win a Super Bowl, because that was a poor decision. But he was hardly the only one. So I never criticized Jeffrey for that because, most people, Chip was the hot candidate at the time. And as you said, most said, well, Bruce is a good coach, but, he's plan B or plan C or plan D. And it's turned out to be on its head, really. The exact opposite. Bruce Arians has turned out to be one of the best coaches in football, and Chip is obviously on his second job. Now, that said, though, people make mistakes. All head coaches make mistakes, and Doug Peterson's not going to be any different. But I think people jumping to rash conclusions, and as I said, judging by my Twitter feed this weekend, everybody on Twitter can handle time management in an NFL game better than Andy Reid, Bruce Arians, and everybody else, Bill Belichick, you name it. It's not as easy as it looks. If you've ever been on an NFL sideline on the last 2 minutes of a game, it's like a Chinese fire drill. There's a lot of things going on. It's not like you have time to sit back and just everything happens in a vacuum. So I think people misconstrue that type of thing. And I've said from the start, I think it's a good hire. I don't believe Jeffrey Lurie when he says this was plan A. It clearly was not. But I think the Eagles got it right, maybe not necessarily on purpose, but I think they got a good hire.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, where you write the Y9 has re-entered the lexicon for Philadelphia Eagles fans. Some, John, think that's a scary proposition. Is it?
No, it's not, and I don't think people understand. There's no such thing in the NFL as a wide nine defense, and I don't know. I'm sure you've heard that numerous times, Mike, over and over and over again, and it's just not a scheme in the NFL. It's an alignment that defensive linemen use at times, and as Jim Schwartz pointed out in my column when he was hired in Buffalo, also pointed out today, said the same thing. All 32 teams in the NFL use the wide nine at times during a game. So the mentality that the Eagles were the only ones using it is false. The mentality that they used the wide nine defense is false under Juan Castillo and Jim Washburn. The big issues with those two is they didn't communicate, and it was a fractured relationship, and it was a fractured plan by Andy Reid. Remember, he hired Jim Washburn before he hired the defensive coordinator, and he also had total autonomy to do anything he wanted up front, and that's bad because too often the back seven and the front four weren't on the same page. That was the issue the Eagles have had with it. Schwartz has had tremendous success with it over the years in Tennessee, in Detroit, in Buffalo, and you're going to see it in Philadelphia because these defensive linemen are going to be thrilled to play in Jim Schwartz's system.
You talked with Jim Schwartz afterwards today, and he was, it's funny. I guess Billy Davis got fired publicly today. I mean, he basically said, well, I'm looking for guys I could trust, Doug Peterson kind of guys. That's why Jim Schwartz is my guy. Hey, Billy, sorry, buddy. You've been let go back there. There you go. You got a chance to hear from Jim Schwartz. What do you know about him, and did you leave impressed by his ideas, just off the scratching the surface, just off your first interaction with him?
Yeah, he's a very impressive guy, and he seemed very comfortable. Jeffrey broke out that you have to be comfortable in your skin today when he was talking about Doug Peterson. That really reflected more about Jim Schwartz, who's very, very comfortable where he is in his career. And remember, he took a year off. He was working in the league office trying to help with the officiating and sort of give them a coach's version of how the players and coaches feel and try to help them get things better and a better relationship between the officiating department and the actual teams, players, and coaches. That's what he was doing. He's been coaching for 23 years, and he's at the point in his career where he can sit back and let things come to him. Philadelphia was hardly the only team interested. Jacksonville wanted him. Cleveland, a lot of people say he was a top name there, and there was rumors that he might go back to Tennessee if they go a different direction from Ray Horton and Dick LeBeau. So I think a lot of people were looking at Jim Schwartz as being the best defensive coordinator candidate on the market, and the Eagles got him. And that, to me, is one of the most important things, not only because he's good at that job, but also, as I mentioned, it was important for Peterson, a first-time head coach, to get at least one coordinator with some experience as a head coach, and he got it with Schwartz.
He sure did, and I think a disruption from the defensive tackles is really a lot of things that you saw from Buffalo with Jim Schwartz. I think that bodes well for guys like Fletcher Cox and Benny Logan. Let me ask you lastly on Marcus Smith. I know Howie Roseman kind of had a mea culpa today by saying, yes, it was me. I take full responsibility, but does Marcus Smith fit better in a 4-3 than a 3-4?
Well, I think it's great for Marcus Smith. Physically, I think he fits better in a 3-4. But this coaching staff had closed its mind to Marcus Smith, as the previous one I'm talking about, Chip Kelly, Billy Davis. Mm-hmm. They had completely closed their mind to him being any contributor whatsoever. So I think new blood and a guy who will look at him and say, people say Howie reached for him in the first round. He certainly did. There's no question about that. But remember, everybody on God's green earth had this guy rated as a second-round pick. So it's not like he doesn't have talent, and it's not like he doesn't have the skill set to play in the NFL. So I think new blood and new coaches will give him a brand-new start and look at him and not hold the old things against him. So from that perspective, I think it's great for Marcus Smith's career. Whether he fits in as a strong side linebacker in the 4-3, we'll have to see. He's athletic enough to do it. His problem is the football IQ just isn't there, and he's had some issues with strength. I mean, this is a guy who had only been playing linebacker at Louisville for a very short time, defensive end, pass rusher, and he needed to get stronger. And he'll be in his third year. We'll see if he can develop and become a player, but certainly this group will look at him and give him every opportunity.
A lot of interesting things that we found out today. Of course, John and I will talk more about him on Friday. He called Sam Bradford a top-notch quarterback that will fit perfectly in the system. He did say he will call his own plays. I guess you can assume that Billy Davis has been fired. He also said he would consider Pat Shurmur for a spot on the staff. Everybody is under consideration. Apparently he will meet with Frank Reich tonight. So the Eagles do not have an offensive coordinator, but it sounds like Peterson will call the plays anyway. So that's just a briefing on some of the things we found out today at Doug Peterson's introductory press conference, where Scott Grayson was there and John McMullen was there. Plenty more on 97.3 ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.